This is the life cycle of a typical flowering plant with a dominant sporophyte and a much reduced gametophyte. All right, so we have heterospore, which means we've got two different sized spores, but they're both produced on the same plant and totally dependent on that parent sporophyte to be produced. So in the andrecium, the anthers, we have a microsporangium, the container that is going to hold and produce the microspores. And within that microsporangium, we've got microsporocytes, or microspore mother cells, which are diploid, that are going to undergo meiosis to form the microspores. So here are the microspores. Those microspores then divide by mitosis one time, and one time only, to produce the male gametophyte, also known as the microgametophyte, also known as the pollen grain. So the pollen grain only has two cells, one of which is the generative cell, and the other of which is the tube nucleus. Okay, within the tube cell. And that's it. That's your male gametophyte, just two cells in size. All right. Meanwhile, within the megasporangium develops within the ovule that is inside of the ovaries. Remember, in the gynecium, we've got a stigma, a style, and an ovary. Within the ovary, we've got ovules. Inside the ovule, you've got the megasporangium. The megasporangium is diploid and it contains the megasporocyte, which isn't shown here, but the megasporocyte, or megaspore mother cell, divides by meiosis to produce the megaspore. And only one of the four megaspores produced by meiosis survives. So we get one megaspore, which is haploid, and that's going to divide by mitosis to form the megagametophyte. The megagametophyte is only going to have 7 cells with 8 nuclei. Those 7 cells are the 3 antipodal cells, the polar nuclei, so the 2 nuclei in one large central cell, 2 cells called synergids, and then the egg itself. All right, and that's your complete female gametophyte. And it is contained within the megasporangium. And there are integuments that are going to later develop into the seed coat. And there is a micropyle, or a small gap, for the pollen tube to enter. Speaking of the pollen tube, the pollen grain lands on the stigma. And the pollen grain will germinate to form the pollen tube that's going to burrow down through the style. And you can see it burrows down through the style. The pollen tube gets to the ovule, goes through the micropyle, and there are 2 sperm that are produced from the generative cell. So the generative cell, once it has germinated, will then divide to form the 2 sperm. And unlike in gymnosperm reproduction and angiosperm reproduction, both of those sperm have a role in fertilization. It's called double fertilization. So one of those sperm is going to fuse with the egg to form the zygote, and the other sperm nucleus is going to fuse with the polar nuclei, those 2 nuclei in the central cell, to form a triploid nucleus that's going to grow by mitosis into the endosperm. So the endosperm of flowering plants is triploid. Remember, the purpose of this endosperm is to become a food source for the developing embryonic plant before it's able to photosynthesize and produce its own energy. So that leads us to the seed. And once again, we've got our baby in a lunchbox. We've got our embryo plant, our new sporophyte, surrounded by its lunch, which is the endosperm, which is different from gymnosperm endosperm because it's triploid, and then a seed coat that surrounds that. And that's our seed. So this all takes place within this enclosed ovary. And this is the hallmark of angiosperms, the covered seed plants, is that all of this development takes place inside a covered seed as opposed to a naked seed in gymnosperms. All right, so if the seed gets dispersed within the ovary wall, which develops into the fruit, that seed might germinate somewhere, and we get a new sporophyte. So one of the other things about being a flowering plant, besides producing flowers within enclosed ovaries, is the development of fruit. So the fate of that ovary wall from the flower is that it will develop into a fruit. And normally when we think of fruits, we think of things like we see in this image here. Lots and lots of fruits in here. But what a fruit is, botanically speaking, it is a container for the seeds. And its job is to disperse the seeds. And sometimes it can do that by producing a tasty covering for the seed that an animal would want to eat and go and excrete the cells somewhere else. But there are a number of other ways that fruits can be employed to disperse the seeds, which is their primary function. So a fruit is a container for seeds. So think about something you get in the produce section of your supermarket. If it has seeds inside, it is, botanically speaking, a fruit. So squash, cucumbers, beans, like green beans, those are all fruits from a botanical point of view, because those containers for seeds develop from the ovary wall, and their main job is to disperse the seeds. And most of the things we find in the produce department are what we call fleshy fruits, but there are a number of fruits that can do the same job of dispersal as dry fruits, not fleshy at all. For example, here's a plant that you can find if you go hiking around in this area, and it's very widespread. This is called burdock. And you can see where the burr comes from. You've got these projections on the fruits with these little hooks that are very good at catching on to the fur of animals, or your socks or your pant legs if you're out hiking around. And once they get hooked on there, they're not going to come off until you get them off. So that's just, and inside you've got the seeds of the burdock, and that's how it disperses and gets to be very widely distributed. Another way that a dry seed can be used to disperse fruit is by using the wind. So here, for example, these are maple fruits. This is called a double samara. Samara is a dry, indehiscent fruit, doesn't split open, that has a wing on it for wind dispersal. Coconuts are another type of fruit that are a dry fruit, even though they've got a liquid endosperm on the inside. So when you go to the grocery store, you might buy one of these types of coconuts that is actually the seed. So this is the this right here is the endocarp. The mesocarp is this fleshy substance here, and then the ectocarp is the hard outer shell. And these coconut fruits float, and they can withstand salt water, so they can move from island to island on ocean currents. And when they land on another patch of land, they can germinate and grow into a new coconut palm tree. So here you can see the fibrous mesocarp, the stony endocarp, and then the, well, you can't really see, it's not labeled here, but the ectocarp. This is stuff on the outside. strawberries, you might think of a strawberry as being a fleshy fruit. But the fact of the matter is, it is not a fleshy fruit. A strawberry has a dry fruit, which is derived from the ovary wall, which are these little pips that you see on the outside of a strawberry. Those are the actual fruits, which are not the seeds, but the seeds are inside of these little dry fruits that are called achenes. So a sunflower seed is another type of achene. So imagine that these are kind of like little tiny sunflower seeds where the hull, the outside part, is what you see, and then inside of there is an even smaller kernel that is the seed that's going to develop into a new strawberry plant. So these are the achenes. Then what is this red thing? The red thing underneath here is actually the receptacle from when the flower was blooming that all four whorls were attached to. And that grows in size. It's like it's inflating to produce this fleshy receptacle, which we think of as a strawberry. Botanically speaking, berries are something very different, however. So this is not a strawberry, but it's a close relative of a strawberry. And you can see that each of these little spots here on the outside, you can see there's the stigma and the style from the ovary. So here's an individual carpel containing a single ovary, and another carpel containing a single ovary. And all of these little spots are carpels containing a single ovary. And so we say this is an accessory fruit because the thing that we like to eat, the agent of dispersal, is really not the ovary wall, which is typical of a simple fruit, but this accessory tissue, the receptacle.